Act 5, Lost and Found Sound. Our quest to locate the world's first sound recordings. Early in 1878, when Edison was receiving all sorts of attention for his magnificent tinfoil phonograph, Scott looked on and he seethed as the international press ignored his work of 20 years before. Being in the book business, he self-published a slender volume in which he set forth the priority of his invention. Although it starts with something of a rant against Edison, Scott's book carefully and completely reprinted the text of almost every document he'd ever prepared regarding the phonautograph. This was our map to the treasure. Here you see the patent documents from 1857 and 1859. Here he speaks of a communication to the Society of Encouragement in 1857. That led us to this document, which told us, unfortunately, that Scott's work with the Society for Encouragement of National Industry had been lost in a flood. And here we see two deposits by Scott at the Academy of Sciences, one in 1857 and one in 1861. Late in 2007, our researcher in Paris, Aline Gattignon, identified the Scott dossier at the French Academy of Sciences and commissioned photos to be sent to me in the States. A CD full of images arrived at my home on February 29, 2008. As I opened each image, I saw Scott's handwritten explanations of his approach, his procedures, his equipment, his experiments, and a phonotogram, and another phonotogram, and a luscious phonotogram. All told, 7 complete phonograms, every one in frustratingly fuzzy, low-res, JPEG artifact-ridden focus. But all were from 1860, 28 years before the first wax cylinder recordings, 17 years before Edison invented the phonograph. I immediately called Patrick Feaster with the news. We were just weeks away from unveiling first sounds at a major conference at Stanford University. We knew our recovery of sounds from Edison's 1878 recordings would be noteworthy, but if we could get these phonograms from 1860 to talk, now that would be newsworthy. Should I risk a trip to the French Academy of Sciences in Paris to get better digitizations? Could we in fact negotiate the privilege of getting into the archives? Would there be enough time to process these images? And even if we could return to the U.S. with scans in time, would the phonograms speak or sing to us at all? One of the great things about the informal structure of First Sounds is that I didn't have to ask anyone's permission. My translator and I got on the phone, negotiated with the director of the archives, hopped onto the next plane to Paris, ingratiated ourselves into the archives, and, well, as you know, our gamble paid off. We did indeed acquire the images and coax a phonotogram from 1860 to sing. Our results were indeed newsworthy. We had recovered what we believed to be humanity's first playable recording of its own voice. We'd prepared a press release with all the basic information, but let me tell you, when your story breaks on the front page of the New York Times, you don't need no stinking press release. Within hours, this was an international story.
The American Thomas Edison is widely regarded as the father of recorded sound, but there are claims now that Mr. Edison was beaten to it by 17 years by a Frenchman. Audio historians have dug up a recording made in 1860 on what's known as a phonautograph, a device created by Parisian inventor Édouard-Léon Scott de Martinville, and for the first time found a way of playing the sound out loud. On the short clip, a woman can be heard singing Au clair de la lune. And I spoke earlier to the inventor's great-grandson, Laurent Scott de Martinville, and played that recording to him the first time he had heard it.
I'm so happy for him because in his last will he asked his children and grandchildren to make sure that his discovery would not be ignored. This is a moral task that was given to us by his own handwritten will, which this one I have at home, and we were particularly proud in the family. We tried to restore his memory, my father and also my grandfather, and they had a marble plate that was put on the wall of the National Library, Rue Vivienne in Paris. That was the place where he lived for the last period of his life and where he passed away. And on this plate it is said that he had invented how to record sounds. As a matter of fact, when he passed away, he had just been, as a spectator, assisting to the presentation of Mr. Edison's invention in Paris. And his name was not even mentioned, and he was so upset that I believe that this is one of the reasons that eventually ended tragically.
This is going to require the rewriting an awful lot of history books, isn't it?
Well, only a few sentences, but key ones.
That was Laurent Scott de Martinville.
As you can tell, Laurent is a diplomat, literally, having spent 20 years in China negotiating trade agreements between the French and Chinese. He also takes his great-grandfather's charge seriously and personally. Not only has he opened the family archives for us, he's also opened doors that only a Frenchman with his savoir-faire can. In fact, Laurent was instrumental in helping us find an even earlier cache of his great-grandfather's phonograms. The story begins when Valerie and Steve, our friends at the French Patent Office, invited Laurent to see for the very first time his great-grandfather's patent applications. It was a fabulous meeting. We lingered over each handwritten page, steeped ourselves in the inventor's milieu, and told stories about our quest to locate and understand Scott's work. Laurent read to us from his great-grandfather's own copy of his 1878 book, The Treasure Map, in which he tells how the patent application in front of us was supported by the Society for the Encouragement for National Industry. Remember the Society for Encouragement for National Industry, the archives that got lost in a flood, as reported by the Journal of the History of Science Society? I was lamenting this fact when Valerie sparked to attention. Speaking rapidly to Laurent in French, which I don't understand, she left the room. If you ever want to conduct research at the French Patent Office, you'll need a copy of this guide to the archives, which was written by Valerie and her colleague Gerard Emtos. So when Valerie left the room, Laurent put it together for me. He said, "Valerie is calling her colleague Professor Emtos. He is in charge of the archives at the Society of Encouragement for National Industry. She does not believe that all of the archives were destroyed, and she has left to call Gerard and ask him to personally look for the Scott dossier. I presume you are okay with that." Professor Emtos was out of the office, and I flew back to the States without meeting him. But days later, we were corresponding by email. In one message I wrote, "Scott presented prints of phonograms to the Society in the fall of 1857. If they survive in your archives, they would be among the earliest recordings of airborne sounds in existence." Gerard wrote back, "We have located a dossier of 36 documents comprised of correspondence and various experiments. In our opinion, this exceptional file should make it possible to reconstitute with precision the advancements made by Scott in concert with the Society. What seems to us most exceptional are the original sheets of recorded sounds. They are quite fragile documents, being of soot deposited on thin paper, in other words, phonograms. We invite you to Paris to scan these documents, although an appointment will be necessary. I have available Friday, December 5th. Cordially, Professor Gerard Emtos." I received this email on Saturday, November 29th, but you can bet that on Friday, December 5th, I was back in Paris. It was immediately evident that these would be among our most important excavations to date, direct evidence of what Scott did, and when he did it, over the course of a whole year of experimentation, 1857. I felt as if our pursuit of the earliest sound recordings had wrapped back in time to converge with Scott's pursuits. We were now in the same groove, if you will, and the sounds encoded in that groove were what we both sought to decipher and understand. So after a day at the Society examining these newly discovered documents, and with digitization gear in tow on the way back to the hotel, I called Patrick to tell him the news.
This is Paris calling. We found 28 phonautograms from 1857. They have some very crazy waveforms on them. They all seem to be original, and none of them are playable. None of them, we won't hear any interpretable sound, I don't think, off of any of them.
Before I can convey to you just how wrong I was, we need to review a few technical aspects of phonautograms.